Hello and welcome to the astrology forecast for the week of Monday, July 7th through Sunday, July 13th, 2025. I hope everyone had a fantastic 4th of July if you are into that. Today we have a lot to talk about. I think the biggest thing that's happening this week is Uranus leaving Taurus and entering Gemini. This is a super duper big deal because as you probably know, it's pretty rare for outer planets to change signs, and Uranus is one of the most outer planets. It only changes signs about once every 8 years. Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, so it's been a while. It's been a long time since Uranus has changed signs. Uranus entering Gemini is particularly important for a couple reasons. For one, Uranus is leaving Taurus where it was in fall, so we have one less planet in its debilitated fall place. Uranus in Taurus is theoretically the most difficult transit for the most difficult sign for Uranus to transit through, basically. And I'm so excited as an astrologer because finally, for the first time in I guess 7 years technically, I don't have to talk about these earthquakes and earth changes or changes to our economy. We've had a lot of that over the last 7 years or so. A lot of natural events and a lot of changes to our economy as well. The financial state of things has changed super dramatically since 2018. I think we all know that. So now Uranus is kind of shaking up a different part of the chart. You probably know that Uranus is called the Awakener, or it's also associated with earthquakes. And so wherever Uranus goes, it shakes things up in a unpredictable sort of way, and it can literally shake things up physically. It can also change our perceptions really dramatically. Uranus is, I think because it's so unpredictable, you might think that it would be a fire energy, right? Because it's so active and volatile and it has to do with sudden changes. That sounds like it should be a fire element thing, right? But the reason why it's not, and it's more associated with the element of air, is because it's not so much like the physical reality that's changing with Uranus as often. Usually it's a change that originates from your mind. It's the perception of the reality that's actually changing. And then from there, there's this element of responsibility that comes with Uranus, because once your perceptions change and you gain more awareness, there's this weight to that awareness. There's this responsibility and a choice of, what do I do with this new perception? Do I continue living my life the same way I have been? Or do I use this knowledge and awareness to improve my circumstances or to change things? And that's where there is sort of a choice. Uranus was discovered, I believe, in 1781, and it was discovered with, basically, it had been there all along. Technically speaking, Uranus is actually visible with the naked eye. It's just that it's very dim and it's very slow moving. And so for thousands of years, it just wasn't really known about. Even though it was there the whole time, it was even technically visible. But it was only with, an instrument, with a telescope, I believe, something like that, that we became aware of it. We became aware that, there are outer planets beyond the orbits of Saturn. And so I think that the reason why I tell that story is because it shows kind of the nature of Uranus. It's not Uranus itself that changed when it was discovered. It was just our awareness of it. It was our perception. And so that's a huge key theme with Uranus. But yeah, Uranus entering Gemini. So it's interesting. It's particularly important because Uranus is no longer in fall. But I also think Uranus in Gemini, it's a very special placement. It's a very special transit. Uranus is not technically at home or exalted in Gemini, but I do think Gemini really emulates Uranus's themes. Gemini is all about, Gemini is a very curious sign, so it's all about learning and increasing perception and awareness. So it's very, although it's technically not a home sign for Uranus, it's very kind of cozy, I would say, for Uranus. It's a very fitting sign. And another reason why Uranus and Gemini is such a big deal is because of this little chart. This is the chart for, this is the most commonly used chart for the United States of America. This is Thursday, July 4th, 1776, 4:50 p.m. It's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But you can see in this chart that Uranus is at 8 degrees Gemini, and it's actually conjunct the descendant. And so what I've noticed, I may have to link a different video I did a while ago, but what I've noticed is that by looking at the transits of Uranus, you can see these huge cycles that we go through in American society. American history and society really revolves around the Uranus cycle for some reason. I'm honestly not exactly sure why. I think part of it is because, like I mentioned, Uranus is in a strong sign in Gemini in America's chart. It's also conjunct one of the angles. So you can see here that Uranus is pretty tightly conjunct the descendant. It's only half a degree away from that exact conjunction with the descendant. And anytime you have a planet conjunct an angle, like the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, or IC, it takes on increased importance and significance in a chart. So for whatever reason, there's this cycle, and again, I'll have to link this video that I did years ago, where I went into much more detail on this kind of cycle that I've seen with American history and the Uranus cycle. But basically, the short of it is every time Uranus enters Gemini, America goes through some kind of crisis. It's always been a war. So for instance, Uranus was in Gemini during the Revolutionary War. Uranus was in Gemini during the Civil War. Uranus was in Gemini again during World War II, and then now Uranus is coming back around. And so, I think the most literal kind of interpretation of that pattern would be to suggest that, there must be some kind of war. It's either a world war or a civil war, or some kind of war. Whatever it is, there tends to be some kind of crisis. And there's this turning point when Uranus is when America experiences its Uranus return and Uranus comes back to Gemini. So in other words, in these later signs of the cycle. So when Uranus is transiting through Pisces, Aries, Taurus, this is kind of the last part of the cycle for America. And so what we see is society kind of splinters apart. We start to associate into smaller and smaller groups. We start to become fractured, and there tend to be a lot of economic troubles, and institutions are no longer trusted. And then things get so bad that there's some kind of crisis, there's some kind of war. And to put it simply, once Uranus comes back around to Gemini, things basically get so bad that there's some kind of really intense crisis that forces everyone to kind of go into panic mode or survival mode. And then once that happens, we kind of bind back together and society becomes unified again. That's what's happened every time. There's some kind of narrative that prevails and some kind of set of values or perspectives that is more or less agreed upon in American society. And then this becomes the new paradigm that we enter the new Uranus cycle, once Uranus goes through Gemini and Cancer, etc. Then we move into a new phase, basically. And I could go on more. The 2020s are very intense because America is experiencing not just the Uranus return, but America has just recently had its Neptune opposition, its Pluto return as well. So this is something that happens to every country once it becomes like more or less about 250 years old. You get those three different events right at that time: the Uranus return, the Neptune opposition, and the Pluto return. So all of this is to say that America is clearly at a very crucial stage in its development. The America that we've known for the last 250 years cannot exist anymore. It either has to end and be replaced by something else, or it has to transform in some way. But I think any of us could agree that immense change is needed. So I know that was very America focused, but this does affect the whole world as well, since of course America plays such a crucial role in world events and such. I just wanted to kind of give you all that. I know I didn't do a separate video for Uranus entering Gemini. I could have. I've just been busy with other things in my life. But yeah, that's kind of the short of it. But I am personally very excited for Uranus in Gemini. Part of that is subjective because I have placements in Gemini, and I personally love Uranus. A lot of astrologers have mixed opinions on Uranus. I think some people view Uranus as very difficult. I've heard someone say that Uranus was their least favorite planet. They view it as more difficult than Saturn. You know, Saturn's usually kind of the bad guy, the planet we love to hate. Some people would go as far as to say, though, like I said, Uranus might be more difficult because the more you resist change, the more you will not like Uranus. And as I get older, I do think change is difficult. Uranus is a disruptor, but as long as you're curious, though, I think that can kind of help you to mitigate some of those negative effects from Uranus. I personally am curious. That's why I do this channel. That's why I love astrology. Maybe a lot of you can relate. But as long as you are interested in increased awareness and increased consciousness, I would think Uranus is going to be your buddy, so to speak, your ally. Uranus will help you to realize new things. So anyway, I may talk about Uranus and Gemini more later, but that's kind of just my 2 cents on it, I guess. One other thing too that we need to talk about for this week is that literally all the outer planets right now are in the first several degrees of their respective signs. Jupiter has already reached 6 degrees Cancer. I can't believe how fast Jupiter's moving, like relative, for its speed. It's pretty fast right now. But if you look at, let's see, I'll use my pointer here. So Pluto's at 2 degrees Aquarius. It's been retrograde for some time now. Neptune has recently stationed retrograde at 2 degrees Aries. Saturn is about to station retrograde this week at 1 degree Aries. And they technically won't make an exact conjunction, but they're going to get very close to a conjunction. But anyway, Pluto 2 degrees Aquarius, Neptune and Saturn at 2 and 1 degrees of Aries. Now with Uranus at 0 degrees Gemini, all the outer planets are at the beginnings of their signs. And with these outer planets in Aquarius, Aries, and Gemini in particular, they are all aspecting each other. Not exactly, we don't have exact aspects this week, but they are within 1 or 2 degrees of basically what's called a minor grand trine, or it's also called a small talent triangle. So basically you have one trine between Pluto and Venus and Uranus in Gemini. And then you've got 2 sextiles. So 1 sextile between Venus and Uranus in Gemini with Neptune and Saturn in Aries. And then another sextile between Pluto in Aquarius and Neptune and Saturn in Aries, if that makes sense. So 2 sextiles and a trine make this kind of, you can see this blue triangle here. So this is a harmonious aspect, right? It's similar to a grand trine, which would be 3 trines. But it's slightly less intense because it's not 3 trines, it's 1 trine and 2 sextiles. But this shows that the outer planets are harmonious with each other, generally speaking. And I know that might sound a little strange since I think recent events have not been harmonious. Things have been pretty extreme. There have been a lot of intense changes. But at the same time, this is pretty much exactly what I predicted. I didn't predict specifics, but I've believed for a long time that the last half of the 2020s will be very action oriented, very volatile. There's going to be a lot more changes. And that's because all these outer planets are in yang signs. They're all in air or fire. And these sextiles and trines, these harmonious aspects, are basically just kind of enabling. They are strengthening. Like all these outer planets are agreeing with one another that, agreeing that this is the time for action. This is the time for newness, if that makes sense. The air is kind of feeding the fire here, I guess you could say. So that just means more action in general, and whether the action is good or bad really just depends on your own personal opinion. It depends on it's subjective, I think. But the bottom line is lots more action to come. And with Venus being a part of this, Venus just entered Gemini last week on Friday the 4th, actually. So Venus is freshly in Gemini, and it's part of this, it's largely an outer planet phenomenon here with this small talent triangle or minor grand trine. But with Venus here, that shows that there is this connection to our short-term consciousness as well. The day-to-day is being affected by all of this as well. It's interesting, too, having Venus enter Gemini so, only a few days apart from Uranus entering Gemini. We suddenly have this shift from Taurus to Gemini, if that makes sense. With Venus in Gemini, we are wanting newness. We're wanting variety. I think this will be really good, for lack of a better word. I think with Venus and Taurus, Venus and Taurus was, of course, in her home sign. I did mention, though, in last week's forecast that both the world wars started with Venus and Mars in Earth signs, and it seems to be a pattern with mass murderers and serial killers to have Venus and Mars in Earth signs. And again, obviously not every person with Venus and Mars and Earth signs is a serial killer. I'm sure there's lots of lovely people out there with those placements, but that does seem to be a pattern. And if you're following the Israel-Iran war, we are currently having a ceasefire. They have a ceasefire, so this kind of makes sense to me for Venus entering Gemini. It's kind of alleviating the tension a little bit. Venus and Taurus is usually a very harmonious placement. We like, seeing the best side of Venus and having all those, lovey-dovey, harmonious, pleasurable vibes from Venus. However, Venus and Taurus is really clashing with all these yang outer planets. So I think now that Venus has entered Gemini, despite her not being in her home sign anymore, she's much more agreeable when it comes to all the outer planets right now, just because of these angles, these aspects that have occurred. So anyway, I think that's good. I think with Venus and Gemini, we're a little bit more open to these changes. We're wanting change. We're wanting newness. We're open to things that are very stimulating. We can handle a lot of stimuli right now. We're wanting to learn and to be open and to have fun. That tends to be kind of the focus of Gemini, I would say. Okay, and there's still more I have to kind of rattle off before we get into the day-by-day forecast. Mercury is in its pre-shadow. It has been ever since Mercury reached 4 degrees Leo on Monday, June 30th. Mercury has been in its pre-shadow, so basically all of last week. And basically, the pre-shadow is not just an extension of Mercury retrograde. It just means that it has entered the area of Leo where it will soon retrograde back over. Right now, Mercury it's slowing down pretty dramatically. Mercury will station retrograde on July 18th at 15 degrees Leo. So you can see here at the start of the week, Mercury's at 11 Leo already. So it's slowing down and will eventually stop from our perception at 15 Leo. The fact that it's in its pre-shadow, or it's basically transiting the area that it will soon transit back over during the retrograde. Basically what that means is at this time we are flying forward and we're not really integrating everything. There's probably a lot going on in your life that you're not fully understanding, and that's okay. This is natural for this part of the Mercury retrograde cycle. With Mercury and Leo, we might be very excited, we might be very open, we might be proud or stubborn, we might be very kind of fixated on our own ideas and beliefs. And again, that's okay. Mercury and Leo can be a lot of fun. But once we get that retrograde starting on Friday the 18th, that's where, yes, it can be dysfunctional. It's associated with technological breakdowns or communication breakdowns. But it's also a chance to kind of catch up on what we may have missed over the last few weeks before the retrograde, if that makes sense. It's a time to, ideally, if we can slow down. I know many of us have schedules where we don't have the privilege of being able to slow down during something like Mercury retrograde. But ideally, that's what that phase is about, is slowing down, integrating, resting, recharging, and maybe kind of pondering, again, kind of just realizing things we may have missed just because there's so much going on right now. So I did want to just give that a shout out. Mercury is in its pre-shadow. We talked about Venus aspects, outer planetary aspects going on. Lots of excitement, lots of change going on for sure with this huge yang focus. Even Jupiter in Cancer, although it's a yin sign, Jupiter is exalted. So we've got a really, really powerful Jupiter as well, which in a weird way, I think is almost a kind of yang energy, despite Cancer being a very kind of receptive sign. Okay, as if all that weren't enough, we also have a full moon happening this week as well, which I'm sure you're aware of. The full moon is going to happen at 18 Capricorn, so I will talk about that as well once we get into the forecast. Okay, let's get into it. I know that was a lot. Let's start out with Monday the 7th. And so here you can see Uranus is at 0 degrees Gemini, which I, of course, knew Uranus was going to enter Gemini on July the 7th. I've been aware of that. But for some reason today, when I pulled up the chart, it just, I don't know, it just strikes me to actually see it in a chart. You know what I mean? I'm actually more excited for Uranus entering Gemini than I was for Pluto entering Aquarius back in November. Even though it's much more rare for Pluto to enter a new sign than Uranus. But I think, again, like I said, I think Uranus and Gemini is so particularly important and exciting. Um, and depending on your own astrology and your own preferences, you may or may not like Uranus. Uranus may be a kind of rude awakener, I guess you could say. It may wake you up to things that you may not want to be aware of, or things that are uncomfortable. But again, I personally love Uranus. It can be very exciting to have these breakthroughs and sudden awareness and learning, especially with Uranus in a sign like Gemini. Um, so yeah, it's a new world. It's a totally new environment with Uranus is basically the last outer planet to change signs. We've had literally every outer planet change signs either in the first half of this year or like with Pluto in late last year in November. Um, so in other words, if you kind of look at the conditions of your life or look at the conditions of the world now compared to last fall, back in like let's say October, everything should be dramatically different. Like the perception is different, the environment's different. It's almost like the rules of physics and the laws of physics are have have fundamentally changed. And like I touched on as well, these changes are mostly centered on going from yin to yang energy. All the outer planets entered yang signs except for Jupiter, which went from Gemini to Cancer. But again, a supercharged Jupiter is kind of a yang energy as well, um, in a way. So all the energies, all these outer planets are facilitating expansion, growth, spontaneity, impulsiveness. And again, whether that's a good thing or not just depends on your own preferences, your own astrology, etc. I love yang signs. I think it's very exciting. Um, Yang signs are like the breath out that comes after a breath in, if that makes sense. The exhale, where all that energy is kind of released that was built up. And I do think we have a lot of pent up energy from, the 2010s were a pretty pent up decade, I would say. And even the first half or so of this decade, with Pluto in Capricorn and Neptune in Pisces, there were a lot of intense yin energies. And for much of the 2010s, we also had Uranus in Aries squaring Pluto in Capricorn. So again, a lot of really pent up energies. So all of that is finally being released, and now we're finally getting all this change and new developments, for better or for worse. But we live in very exciting times for sure. The only aspect for today is Venus at 3 degrees Gemini, making a trine to Pluto at 3 degrees Aquarius. So it looks like this must happen in the first half of the day, Eastern time, because Pluto just barely goes to 2 degrees Aquarius today. Um, so again, like I mentioned, it's not, I don't view this aspect independently. It's not so much just about Venus trining Pluto. This is really this blue minor grand trine. Um, 5 planets are involved in this trine. 2 in Gemini, 2 in Aries, 1 in Aquarius. So, once you get all these planets kind of stacked up, involved in an aspect like this, it's kind of like a whole party, right? Like 5 becomes a party. 5 planets becomes, it's, what am I saying? So basically, it's showing growth, it's showing development. The minor grand trine is it's about growth, it's about development. It's a little bit different than a grand trine would be. Like the energies are kind of fully developed already. But with a minor grand trine, there's something growing. There's this new hunger for like diversity and variety and newness with Venus and Gemini. And I think, again, I sort of touched on this, but with Venus and Taurus, I think we may have been resisting this newness. We may have been looking around going like, what is happening in the world? We just want stability. Now with Venus and Gemini, we're a little bit more open to these changes, which is good because the changes are going to happen whether we like it or not. There's going to be all this kind of new energy with these yang planets going on. So Monday's weird. I think Monday is, you may feel that something has shifted. with, not only Uranus entering Gemini today, but again, Venus has just only entered Gemini last Friday. So there's something new. There's something. Not only has a lot already transpired and a lot of shifts have happened, but we still have a lot more to come as well. Another part of this is just how, like I've mentioned, how yang dominant this chart is. Mars is now the only Earth planet. So it's a little strange when Mars is the one trying to ground things, Mars in Virgo here. And we also only have two planets in water, that would be Sun and Jupiter. So really this chart is very yang dominant, I would say. So Monday is going to be like a brave new world, I guess you could say. It's a new, you can sense the newness and you can sense more changes coming as well. Looking at Tuesday, July 8th, there are no exact aspects today. Moon is cruising through Sagittarius. I forgot to mention that for Monday as well. So Monday, Tuesday, and almost half of Wednesday, you're going to have Moon going through Sag. So again, it's yet another yang sign, yang transit. And you're going to feel this kind of build up because the Moon is, of course, not full yet. But with Moon in Sagittarius, it's such an optimistic, maybe even an overly optimistic kind of energy. And the Moon is gaining light, so it shows that things are building, the light is coming, there's more and more energy. We're already feeling that build up the first half of the week before the full moon, basically. So I would just say some of us may be overly optimistic or overly energetic, overly ambitious this first half of the week. If you are someone that maybe doesn't have a lot of yang energy in your chart, this could be good as long as you're open to it. This may help you to be a little bit more I don't know, ambitious, or to take on big dreams, big projects. That could be good depending on your chart, depending on how you use it. But also, if you do have a lot of yin, a lot of earth and water in your chart, things may feel hectic right now. You may feel a little bit out of your element. The more yang planets in your chart you have, the more you're going to welcome these energies, I guess you could say. So it's a little bit strange for Cancer season. We don't have a huge focus on Cancer. We do have Sun and Jupiter there, but no other water planets at all right now. So really, it's one of those kind of strange times where the Sun is more or less alone. There's nothing really trining or conjoining the Sun right now. The focus is really on new developments. It's very exciting, very energetic. Moon going through Sagittarius is very much kind of party energy, I guess you could say. In short, the beginning of the week is probably going to be wild, maybe very fun, but it could also be hectic. It could be chaotic as well. Going to Wednesday, July 9th, first half of the day, roughly, we have Moon in Sagittarius still. So to me, Monday, Tuesday, early Wednesday is definitely one kind of mini chapter, I guess you could say, with Moon in Sag. But then that does change pretty dramatically just before noon Eastern time when Moon leaves Sagittarius and enters Capricorn. And this energy, this transit looks much more intense to me because not only is Moon in detriment in Capricorn, so it's a kind of a harsh transit. We might feel emotionally a little bit unsettled, and I always say that there is a silver lining to this because we're feeling a little restless or a little bit dissatisfied with the status quo. That's why Moon in Capricorn is such a productive energy and very individualistic, very goal oriented. Because the status quo may no longer be good enough, it's motivating us to make a change or to plan things. So you can use this. This can be a really useful energy. It's just also not the coziest energy. It's a little bit unsettling. But another reason why this energy is so intense is, of course, because of the upcoming full moon. The full moon will technically happen on Thursday the 10th, but even on Wednesday, now that we have Moon in Capricorn where it will be full, it's close enough that the moon is going to appear very full, either very early Wednesday or late Wednesday. The moon is, we're starting to become within the orb of the full moon. So I would say even Wednesday, you may feel that kind of classic full moon energy. Maybe people not really acting like themselves. that kind of lunacy kind of coming in, where there's a lot of energy, and it's a little bit unusual for Capricorn moon is typically very like stoic, strict, very refined energy, but because we're within orb of this full moon, it's going to be chaotic, it's going to be intense. There could be this kind of gridlock between basically this clash that's about to happen between Sun and Cancer, Moon and Capricorn. Looking at the Cancer Capricorn axis, both of these signs, these cardinal yin signs, they are both focused on some of the same things. They're both focused on building a foundation. Both Cancer and Capricorn, I think, kind of pull back their energy, and they're very, what's the word, like, very particular about how they utilize their energy. They only want to invest their energy into things that are worth investing in. They really want to pull back, and Cancer and Capricorn are not the most adventurous energies by any means. They're more focused on kind of building a home, building a structure. So they do have these commonalities, but there's this huge difference because Sun in Cancer is more focused on, let's just kind of live in the moment. How do I feel right now? Versus Moon in Capricorn says, screw all that. I'm not prioritizing my immediate well-being. I need to prioritize my long-term well-being. So there's this huge kind of discrepancy there. Which one do you do? Do you do you kind of prioritize your immediate well-being and your immediate feelings, or do you dissociate from that in order to look at the long term and plan ahead? So there could be a clash there. There could be also a clash between, I think Capricorn is more of it's a very industrious sign, right? So it's more focused on work and reputation and things like that. Cancer doesn't so much want to focus on that. It wants to pull back and focus on home and family and friends and things of that nature. So again, you may feel this kind of split in which do you prioritize, which side do you go. There could be a sort of crossroads for you. And of course, as always, for more information on this, you can look to where do Cancer and Capricorn fall in your chart in general. Like, what houses do you have there? Are they at the top and bottom of your chart, or the left and the right side, etc.? That's where you can see this kind of split happening for you, or this crossroads. And specifically, I know we're not there quite yet, but the full moon will happen at 18 degrees Capricorn. So you can look to where does 18 degrees Capricorn fall in your chart, but 18 degrees Cancer as well is very important for this aspect. Okay, so I've already been talking about the full moon because I do see it as, the themes and the energies associated with the full moon are going to start to hit you on Wednesday, I would say, especially if you do have placements around 18 degrees of really any cardinal sign, especially Cancer and Capricorn, but also Libra and Aries as well. If you have placements at those degrees, this could be, life-changing for you. And like I said, there could be some kind of intense crossroads or some kind of weighing of your priorities, some kind of choice. But anyway, so let's look at Thursday the 10th. The full moon will technically happen at 18 Capricorn. Looks like in the afternoon Eastern time. So again, you can expect all those kind of full moon themes throughout Thursday. The craziness, the chaos, the choices, the priorities. This full moon doesn't aspect a whole lot. Remember, all the outer planets are at the beginning of their signs, right? So with this full moon at 18 Capricorn, it's not really aspecting a whole lot. Moon is, of course, being opposed by the sun. That's what a full moon is. Other than that, there's really only one aspect that I can see. I guess you could say two. The full moon does sort of, it does make a loose quincunx to Mercury. And the full moon also makes a trine to Mars. So especially with this trine to Mars and Virgo, this looks like a potentially very productive full moon. And like I said, there could be this sudden shift in priorities. Maybe there's just a sort of realization, like you may get kind of like a kick from behind, and this kind of like sudden wake up call, and you may realize like, oh, I need to start working on this or that. I may need to start working on a new project. I may need to shift directions or shift my priorities a little bit. Mars and Virgo and Moon and Capricorn, these are great energies for getting real. Let's get real here. Let's get practical. What do we need to do to be prepared, right? That's what Virgo and Capricorn are all about. And Moon and Mars in particular, I think, are very much focused on like what do I want? How do I be safe? I think they can both be kind of emotionally intense planets. So being in Earth signs, it's just showing that we are prioritizing, you know, getting real, being safe, being practical, being prepared, and there may be kind of a sudden like work ethic that is kind of springing about for some of us. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much my take on it. So I don't know. I have a feeling like this will be intense for some reason, despite the relative lack of aspects. Cancer and Capricorn, whenever you combine two cardinal signs, it can be pretty intense because um, both Cancer and Capricorn, because they're cardinal signs, they're both asserting something. They're both asserting their own kind of individuality, their own agenda, so to speak. So once they clash together, they're not always super open to blending with each other. You know what I mean? Like they're both asserting themselves in a different way. And with these signs in particular, Cancer and Capricorn, because they're both yin signs, they're not always open to exploring energies that are different from themselves. They're a little bit more closed off sometimes, I would say. So in other words, combining Sun and Cancer with Moon and Capricorn, this can be very intense. This can be in a weird way, it kind of reminds me of the quarter moon we had a week ago, the first quarter moon in Libra on Wednesday the 2nd. There was this weird tension between Sun and Cancer and Moon in Libra. So it's kind of similar. Again, we're combining two cardinal signs. There could be a lot of tension when you combine two cardinal signs. So with this full moon, on the one hand, I could see a lot of like very literal physical changes or new projects, new priorities, new things happening in your life. But there could also be a lot of kind of unspoken tension and maybe changes kind of behind the scenes as well. So in short, this does look very tense, but this can also be a great wake-up call, and it can be great for starting a new project or starting some kind of new strategy to work ahead and be responsible. How can you be the best advocate for your own kind of well-being in the long term? How can you be your own parent, so to speak? That's something I think about sometimes. Earth signs are all about making the right choice, being mature, being responsible, at least ideally, that's what they're about. So, how can you make the right choice for you, not just whatever's fun or pleasurable, but what's truly going to help you in the long run? Okay, let's look at Friday the 11th. So Moon continues cruising on through Capricorn. So you may continue to get a lot of that kind of the tense themes and vibes from the full moon. So basically Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe early Friday, a lot of that intensity is still kind of transpiring. This does change though. About, just after noon Eastern time, Moon will leave Capricorn and enter Aquarius. And if you've been paying attention, you'll know why this is kind of a big deal, because Moon entering Aquarius would not usually be that big of a deal, right? Pluto's been hanging out there for some time, so usually I would say Pluto crossing this area would mean we could for a short time on Friday have like an increased awareness of insecurities or kind of like darker aspects of our reality from that Pluto crossing, that Pluto conjunction. But because of this minor grand trine, as Moon enters Pluto, as Moon enters Aquarius, it's not just conjoining Pluto, it's also sextiling Neptune and Saturn, and it's also trining Uranus, and then soon it will be trining Venus as well. So in other words, it's entering this minor grand trine that's still kind of being held together loosely with all these planets. So now we have 6 planets involved in this minor grand trine. You could still kind of include Venus, although Venus is already at 7 degrees Gemini. We'll just include her just because. So yeah, if you include Venus, there's 2 planets in Gemini, 2 planets in Aries, 2 planets in Aquarius, all making these sextiles and trines to one another. So again, there could be a lot of intensity, like a lot of energy is being released right now. And I was talking earlier about how like these energies that were held for years, for decades, are being released now. But now there may be even more energy being released. Coming off of this really intense Capricorn full moon, there was more energy that may have been released during the full moon, but there may also been more pent up energy as well from that Cancer Capricorn opposition. So now as as Moon enters Aquarius, um, because it kind of triggers all these aspects again, this could release more energy. So there could be some kind of world events on Friday. There could be, I mean, definitely Thursday could be a time of world events because of the full moon, but maybe even more so on Friday because of all these aspects. This looks maybe even more significant. This could also be a time of dramatic changes or dramatic realizations. Aquarius is the sign of Uranus in modern astrology. So Moon crossing over Pluto, trining Uranus in Gemini. Um, I think Moon is sort of the first planet to make an exact aspect with Uranus since Uranus has entered Gemini. So it's really bringing that focus to this new sort of world or this new chapter that we're in. Um, so some kind of new event, whatever happens on Friday, I think is going to be really indicative of our time with Uranus in Gemini, whether that be in your personal life or in the world. There's some kind of new theme. There's some kind of new wave of energy that's really hitting us on Friday, I think. Okay, let's go to Saturday. So Saturday, of course, Moon continues through Aquarius. Moon will continue to transit Aquarius basically all of the weekend. So yeah, I don't know. It's a strange weekend with Moon and Aquarius and Sun and Cancer. These energies are very different from each other. But both Cancer and Aquarius are sort of about groups, right? If Cancer is about home and family, and Aquarius is about more public kind of groups, they're both a little bit tribal in nature, right? They're both about families or groups or what have you. So that could be the focus for a lot of us this weekend is like who's my tribe, right? Who are my people, so to speak? Who am I kind of loyal to? So this could be a great time for focusing on friendships and family, or even maybe I don't know if you're close with your coworkers, if you have some kind of shared trauma with your coworkers or loyalty on some level. This could be a great time for bonding there as well. And it's really strange, like I said, because usually right now things would be cooling off because we're moving away from the full moon. But because the moon is still, at least by sign, it's aligned with all these sextiles and trines, um, it's almost like there's this kind of new intensity. It's almost more action oriented as we get into the weekend. And it's unpredictable, right? With Moon in Aquarius, all the air signs are double sided. They all have two lines in their glyphs. So with Moon in Aquarius, the question is, which one is it? Are we seeing the crazy, like radical, rebellious side of Aquarius, or are we seeing a different side? Aquarius can also be very kind of strict and stern and stoic, and reserved, and it can be Aquarius can be the rebel. Aquarius can also be the it can be very obedient to the group as well. It has that kind of choice it has to make. So that's what we're all experiencing on some level this weekend with Moon cruising through Aquarius, basically. One last thing about this too. So Saturday, early in the day, Moon will make that exact trine to Venus very early Saturday, so maybe late Friday night, depending on your time zone. Both Moon trining Venus. This is not a super life changing thing, but it's just kind of highlighting. Basically, Moon is highlighting not just Pluto, but it's also highlighting Uranus and Venus in their new sign of Gemini through those trines it's making, if that makes sense. So again, I think it's kind of shining a light on these new energies. It's shining a light on how we might be very experimental at this time. Both Gemini and Aquarius are very curious and experimental. They want to just try things just for the sake of trying them, right? So this may be kind of coming to light with these aspects. For Sunday, again, Moon continues through Aquarius. Moon will enter Pisces close to midnight Sunday night. So, in other words, we basically have Moon in Aquarius all for the whole weekend. So again, with all this kind of air focus now, things can be a little quirky. Things can be unpredictable and a little detached, right? Intellectual. Not really what we'd expect from Cancer season. This is a little unusual, I think, having so much air and fire as well. There is one event happening on Sunday, and that would be Saturn stationing retrograde. So honestly, part of me almost wants to kind of like cheer at that, because when planets station retrograde, it's almost like they kind of go to sleep. It's like they take an Ambien, and even if they're awake still, they're a little, out there. They're not really there in, at least not in such a literal, like physical sense, if that makes sense. Um, with outer planets retrograding, yeah, it's like their energies kind of become softer, a little more numb. I like my Ambien analogy. I think that's a good analogy. It's kind of like they're dreaming. So with Saturn in particular stationing retrograde, it means that the usual like binds and the rules and all the structure, it becomes a little more loosey goosey. You know what I mean? Like Saturn is not acting like its normal self. It's kind of moving backward from our perception going forward. And both Saturn and Neptune will actually enter Pisces later on this year. So it shows that we're actually not done. We have a little bit of unfinished business with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. We have to go through some loss still, and it's going to be really interesting early next year because Saturn and Neptune will enter Aries again, more or less together. So it really shows that we're on the cusp of this new age. I really believe that Age of Aquarius starts sometime either next year or the year after. So we're on the cusp of that, basically. But anyway, on a more short-term level, Saturn retrograde, it is a blessing if you don't like the energies of Saturn. If you don't want to deal with, that structure and discipline and whatnot, things can be a little bit more, a little freer, a little bit more fun with Saturn retrograde. On the other hand, though, things can be a little bit scary. Things can get out of hand because we don't have that structure as much with Saturn retrograde. I'd also speculate that maybe like governments or world governments or police force may not have as tight of a grip with Saturn retrograde as well. And depending on how you look at it, that could be good or bad, right? I mean, it kind of just depends. But anyway, that's pretty much what I have for this forecast. So I hope this helps you. I hope you have a fantastic week. Next week, Mercury's going to station retrograde. Mars will cross over the south node, and we have a third quarter moon that's going to shake things up more. So there's just more and more developments happening. This is a really bizarre year. But yeah, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.